Marcus Reed surveyed what defied all logic. 100-acre spread purchased for a single dollar bill. The sun-bleached fence posts extended endlessly beneath the scorching midday heat, while the main homestead sat like an abandoned dream across the prairie. When he finally crossed that groaning threshold 4 hours later, he uncovered something the previous owner had conveniently omitted from their transaction. The property wasn't vacant. Movement reached his ears initially. Gentle steps overhead, measured and cautious, like someone avoiding detection. Marcus remained motionless in the entryway, his fingers still clutching the worn door handle. The structure was meant to be uninhabited. Samuel Dutch had guaranteed it during their meeting at the county office. "That place has been deserted for ages," the man had insisted, his gaze shifting nervously. "Complete solitude awaits you." Yet there she stood. A young woman materialized at the head of the timber stairway, her auburn locks cascading past her shoulders, clothed in a weathered dress that showed its years. She neither cried out nor fled. Instead, she observed him with the most peculiar look, not terror, but something resembling acceptance, as though she'd anticipated this encounter for ages. "You're the new proprietor," she stated, her tone controlled despite the situation. "I'm Elena Morrison. I've been maintaining this property." Marcus's thoughts whirled. Maintaining it? For whom? Why hadn't Dutch mentioned her presence? He examined her expression, seeking deceit, but discovered only a quiet determination that echoed his own mother's strength during their most challenging periods. "The cellar made no mention of any occupant," he finally said. Elena walked down the stairs deliberately, each movement careful and elegant. "Samuel Dutch understands little about this ranch's true nature," she responded. "There are aspects of this territory that run deeper than any legal document." She approached the window and drew aside the worn fabric, exposing the endless grassland beyond. "I've resided here for 3 seasons. This location preserved my existence when I had no alternatives. I've maintained the roof, kept the water source clean, and repaired the boundaries. One might say we've been caring for each other." Marcus sensed his carefully constructed plans wavering beneath him. He'd accumulated every cent for half a decade to purchase his own territory, to create something that truly belonged to him. This ranch, despite its neglected condition, embodied everything he'd envisioned. Yet now, standing in this dusty chamber with this unforeseen woman, he understood his dollar investment had delivered something far more intricate than mere real estate. "Why did Dutch sell it so cheaply?" he inquired, though he suspected the response would alter everything. Elena turned from the window, and for the first time, he witnessed anxiety flicker across her features. "Because," she said softly, "he's not the sole person aware of my presence here. And the others, they're not arriving to negotiate." Marcus placed his weathered leather bag on the wooden surface, his mind spinning with questions demanding answers. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the grimy windows created lengthy shadows across Elena's face, and he could observe the burden of hidden truths weighing on her shoulders. "Who's pursuing you?" he asked, maintaining his voice steady despite the mounting tension in his chest. Elena moved from the window, her hands clasped firmly before her. "Men who believe I possess something belonging to them," she said. "Something valuable enough that they've pursued me for 3 seasons. Did you take it?" She met his gaze directly, and he saw no deception there. "I retrieved something, yes, but it belonged to me long before they ever claimed it." Her voice carried pain that spoke of ancient wounds. "My father's mining claim. He perished in a tunnel collapse, and these men appeared with falsified documents claiming he owed them everything. They seized our home, our land, everything we possessed." Marcus studied her expression, recognizing the look of someone pushed beyond their limits. He'd seen it in his own reflection during the darkest years following his wife's death. "So you reclaimed what was rightfully yours?" "I recovered the original deed and the survey charts proving our claim was legitimate," Elena said. "Documents that would expose their entire operation if they ever reached a courtroom." She laughed bitterly. "But surviving long enough to reach a courthouse presents the real challenge." The sound of approaching horsemen in the distance made them both freeze. Elena hurried to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to observe. Marcus joined her, and together they watched three riders advancing along the main path, still too distant to identify clearly, but close enough to signal trouble. "Is that them?" Marcus whispered. Elena shook her head. "No, but," she paused, studying the riders more carefully. "That's peculiar. Those horses are moving too quickly for casual travelers, yet too slowly for urgency, as if they're searching for something." Marcus felt his stomach clench. He'd purchased this ranch to avoid complications, to construct a simple existence on his own terms. But watching those distant figures approach, he realized his $1 investment had drawn him into something far more perilous than he'd anticipated. "I should depart," Elena said suddenly, turning from the window. "I've already brought excessive trouble to this place. You don't deserve to become entangled in my difficulties." "Where would you go?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't certain why he cared. For hours ago, he'd never known of her existence. She hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty he saw the truth. She had nowhere left to flee. The riders drew nearer, their intentions unknown but their presence undeniably menacing. "How long before the dangerous ones locate you here?" he asked. Elena looked back toward the approaching riders, then met his gaze. "If those men approaching are who I suspect," she said quietly, "they already have." The riders approached closer, and Marcus could distinguish their faces now. Hardened men with the kind of weathered features that came from years of taking whatever they desired. They reined their horses about 50 yards from the house, close enough to threaten, but distant enough to avoid immediate confrontation. "That's Garrett Stone," Elena whispered, her voice tight with recognition. "He works for the Crawford brothers. If he's here, it means they've finally tracked me down." Marcus watched as the three men spread into a loose half-circle, effectively blocking the primary escape routes from the property. Their movements were practiced, coordinated. These weren't random wanderers. They were hunters who'd found their quarry. "What exactly did you take from them?" he asked, needing to understand what he was stepping into. Elena moved from the window and knelt beside a loose floorboard near the hearth. With quick, efficient movements, she pried it up and reached into the concealed space beneath. When she stood, she held a leather pouch and a rolled bundle of papers. "The deed to the richest gold claim in the territory," she said, unrolling one of the documents, "and the survey maps showing exactly where the ore runs deepest. My father spent a decade mapping every vein, every gold pocket in those hills. The Crawford brothers killed him for it, then discovered he'd hidden the real documents." Marcus studied the intricate drawings on the map, noting the careful notations and detailed measurements. This wasn't merely a claim. It was a treasure map drawn by someone who knew every inch of the terrain. "This is worth a fortune," he said. "Enough to purchase half the territory," Elena confirmed, "and enough to make them hunt me across 3 states." A sharp whistle from outside made them both turn toward the window. Garrett Stone had dismounted and was walking slowly toward the house, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. His companions remained mounted, watching the surrounding area for any signs of movement. "Elena Morrison," Stone called out, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "We know you're in there. Time to settle this like civilized people." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. 3 years of carpentry work had given him strong hands and steady nerves, but he'd never faced men like these. Still, looking at Elena's pale face, he realized he couldn't simply hand her over to them. "There's a rear exit," she whispered urgently. "Through the kitchen and down to the creek. You could slip away while they're focused on the front of the house. What about you?" She smiled sadly. "I'm tired of running. Perhaps it's time to face them." Marcus stared at her, recognizing the resignation in her voice. She was surrendering, ready to sacrifice herself so he could escape the mess his $1 purchase had created. But as Stone's footsteps approached the front porch, echoing like a countdown, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. "No," he said firmly, moving to the window. "This is my property now, and I don't recall inviting anyone onto it." Stone stopped at the base of the porch steps, looking up at the house with a cold smile that promised violence. Marcus stepped onto the front porch, ensuring Stone could see him clearly. The afternoon sun cast his shadow long across the weathered boards, and he kept his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "This is private property," he called out. "You and your friends need to move along." Stone's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Well now, looks like the little lady found herself a protector." He took another step closer, his spurs jangling with each movement. "Thing is, friend, we're not here for trouble with you. Just need to have a conversation with Miss Morrison about some property that belongs to our employer." "I don't see any legal papers," Marcus replied, noting how Stone's companions had positioned themselves to cover all angles of approach. "Far as I know, anything on this ranch belongs to me now." Stone chuckled. "A sound like gravel in a tin cup. Legal papers. That's amusing." He gestured toward the house. "See, the way we figure it, Miss Morrison has been squatting on this land for years, probably going through anything of value left behind by the previous owners. Wouldn't be surprised if she found some items that need to be returned to their rightful owners." Inside the house, Marcus could hear Elena moving quietly, hopefully hiding the documents somewhere safer. He needed to buy her time, but Stone was clearly growing impatient with the conversation. "Tell you what," Stone continued, his hand now resting openly on his gun handle. "Why don't you call her out here so we can all discuss this like reasonable folks? No need for anyone to get hurt over a simple misunderstanding." Marcus felt sweat gathering at the base of his neck despite the cooling afternoon air. 3 against 1 weren't odds any sensible man would take, especially when he wasn't even sure what he was fighting for. But looking at Stone's cold eyes, he realized this wasn't about justice or legal claims. These men would take what they wanted regardless of who got hurt in the process. "She's not here," he lied, hoping his voice sounded more convincing than it felt. Stone's expression darkened. "Now that's interesting because my associate over there with the sharp eyes swears he saw 2 figures in that window not 5 minutes ago." He pointed toward one of the mounted men. "Billy's got a talent for noticing details others might miss." The man called Billy tipped his hat mockingly, his rifle resting casually across his saddle, but positioned for quick use. "Maybe you saw shadows," Marcus suggested. "Old houses play tricks with the light." "Maybe," Stone agreed, though his tone suggested he believed nothing of the sort. "Or maybe you're protecting someone who's caused my employer considerable financial loss. That kind of loyalty to a stranger might make a man wonder about your own involvement in the situation." The threat was clear now. Stone was suggesting that Marcus himself might be complicit in whatever theft they were pursuing. It was a clever move. Give him a way out by abandoning Elena, or face the consequences of standing with her. Through the window behind him, Marcus heard the softest creak of floorboards. Elena was still moving around inside, and Stone's companion would notice any sound that carried. "Time's running short," Stone said, pulling out a pocket watch and making a show of checking it. "My patients tend to wear thin when folks aren't being honest with me." The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, ready to snap. Marcus could feel Stone studying his face, searching for cracks in his resolve. Behind him, the house had gone completely quiet. Too quiet. Either Elena had found the perfect hiding spot, or she was preparing for something desperate. "You know what I think?" Stone said, closing his pocket watch with a sharp click. "I think you bought this place knowing exactly what you'd find here. Maybe Miss Morrison promised you a share of what she stole if you helped her stay hidden." "You think wrong," Marcus replied, though he had to admit the accusation sounded plausible. "I bought this ranch fair and square this morning. First time I've ever set foot on this property." Stone exchanged glances with his mounted companions, some silent communication passing between them. The man called Billy shifted in his saddle, and Marcus caught the subtle movement of his hand toward his rifle. "Here's what's going to happen," Stone announced, his voice taking on the tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You're going to step aside, and we're going to search this house. When we find what we're looking for, we'll be on our way. Resist, and you'll be buried on your own property before sunset." Marcus's mouth went dry, but he held his ground. "And if I refuse?" Stone's smile returned, colder than before. "Then we'll search it anyway, and you won't be around to complain about the mess we make." The front door opened behind Marcus with a soft creak, and he felt his heart stop. Elena stepped out onto the porch, her chin raised defiantly despite the obvious fear in her eyes. She had changed into riding clothes and carried a small pack slung over her shoulder. "Enough," she said firmly. "This man has nothing to do with our business, Stone. Let's settle this between us." Stone's expression shifted to one of satisfaction, like a hunter who'd finally cornered his prey. "There's the sensible approach. Step down here, Miss Morrison, and we can discuss terms." "The terms are simple," Elena replied, staying close to Marcus's side. "You let him go, and I'll come with you willingly. No violence, no threats, just me for his safety." Marcus turned to stare at her. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," she interrupted softly. "You've already done more than anyone had a right to expect." Stone clapped his hands together once, the sound sharp in the afternoon air. "See how easy that was? Now about those documents you took." "What documents?" Elena asked, her voice steady. "The ones that prove our employer's legitimate claim to the Morrison mine," Stone said patiently. "The papers your father hid before his unfortunate accident." "My father died in a cave-in caused by your employer's unsafe mining practices," Elena shot back. There were no documents to hide. Stone's facade of civility began to crack. "Don't play games with me, girl. We know you have them, and we know they're here. The only question is whether we tear this place apart board by board to find them." Elena met his gaze steadily, but Marcus could see her hands trembling slightly. Whatever documents she'd shown him were her only leverage, and she was about to lose them. That's when the sound of more approaching riders echoed across the valley, coming fast from the Easter Trail. Stone spun toward the sound of approaching hoofbeats, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. The new riders were still distant, but they were coming hard and fast, dust rising in their wake like a brown cloud against the horizon. "Billy," Stone barked to his sharp-eyed companion. "How many?" The man squinted into the distance, shading his eyes with one hand. "4 riders, maybe 5. Can't make out who they are from here, but they're pushing their horses hard." Stone's jaw tightened. Could be trouble. He turned back to Elena, his earlier patience completely gone. Change of plans. We're taking you and those documents now, before whoever that is decides to complicate things. I told you I don't have any documents, Elena insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Search the house. Stone ordered his men. Tear it apart if you have to. Marcus stepped forward, blocking the porch steps. You're not going anywhere near my house. Stone's gun cleared its holster so fast Marcus barely saw the movement. The cold metal pressed against his forehead, and he could smell the gun oil and leather from Stone's gloves. Last chance to be smart about this, Stone growled. Stand aside, or I'll put you down right here. The approaching riders were closer now, close enough that their individual horses could be distinguished. Marcus could see they were riding in formation, disciplined and purposeful, not random travelers, but men with a mission. Garrett Stone. The shout came from the lead rider, still 200 yards away, but closing fast. Step away from those people. Stone's eyes widened in recognition, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Marcus saw genuine concern cross his features. Damn, he muttered under his breath. Friend of yours? Elena asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Sheriff Taylor. Stone replied through gritted teeth. Someone must have sent word ahead. He glanced back at his companions, who were looking increasingly nervous about their exposed position. The riders thundered closer, and Marcus could now make out the distinctive glint of badge metal on the lead rider's vest. A sheriff and his deputies were riding like they meant business, but Stone's gun was still pressed against Marcus's skull, and his finger was tight on the trigger. This complicates things, Stone said, more to himself than anyone else. But it doesn't change what needs to happen here. Sheriff Taylor and his men were within shouting distance now, their horses lathered with sweat from the hard ride. The sheriff was a lean man with gray whiskers and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years dealing with situations exactly like this one. Drop your weapons, Taylor called out as his group fanned out in a semicircle around Stone's men. Nobody needs to die today. Stone pressed the gun harder against Marcus's forehead. Maybe nobody needs to die, he called back. But that depends on whether you're willing to let justice take its course. Justice? Taylor laughed harshly. Is that what you call hunting down an innocent woman across 3 territories? Stone's face darkened. That woman is a thief who's been harboring stolen property. We're here on behalf of legitimate business interests to recover what belongs to them. The Crawford brothers' business interests. The Crawford brothers, Taylor replied, his voice dripping with disgust. I've seen enough of their version of justice to know what it looks like. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Stone's men were outnumbered now, but they still held the advantage of having hostages. Marcus could feel sweat trickling down his back as he tried to remain perfectly still with the gun barrel pressed against his skin. Here's what's going to happen, Stone announced, his voice carrying across the yard. Miss Morrison and I are going to have a private conversation about those documents. Anyone who interferes will watch this brave property owner pay the price. Sheriff Taylor held up one hand, signaling his deputies to hold their positions. The standoff stretched taut like a wire about to snap, everyone waiting for someone else to make the first move that would determine who lived and who died. Stone, the sheriff said carefully, you're making a mistake here. The Crawford brothers don't own this territory, and they sure don't own me. Maybe not, Stone replied, never taking his eyes off Taylor while keeping the gun pressed firmly against Marcus's head. But they own enough judges and politicians to make your life very difficult if you interfere with legitimate business. Elena stepped forward slightly, drawing Stone's attention. Stop this, she said firmly. You want the documents? Fine. They're hidden under the loose floorboard by the fireplace, wrapped in oiled cloth. Marcus felt his heart sink. She was giving up the only leverage she had, throwing away 3 years of careful hiding to save a man she'd met hours ago. Stone's eyes lit up with triumph, but he didn't lower his weapon. "Billy, get in there and find them and be careful. Miss Morrison has proven herself quite creative when it comes to hiding things." The sharp-eyed rider dismounted and moved toward the porch, but Sheriff Taylor's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Billy," Taylor called out. "See, I've got a warrant here for Garrett Stone's arrest on charges of murder, robbery, and conspiracy. Anyone who helps him is looking at being an accessory after the fact." Billy froze on the bottom step, looking back at Stone uncertainly. "You didn't say nothing about murder charges, Garrett." "Shut up and get those papers," Stone snarled. But Marcus could hear the edge of panic creeping into his voice. "The murder of James Morrison," Sheriff Taylor continued, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Elena's father. Seems we found a witness who saw you and the Crawford brothers' rig at Mine Cabin. Man's been hiding in fear for 3 years, but he finally decided to come forward." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Someone saw what happened to my father?" "Old Pete Carson," Taylor confirmed. "He was working a claim upstream when he saw Stone and 2 other men tampering with the support beams in your father's mine. He says they knew exactly when James would be going down for his afternoon check." Stone's face had gone pale, but his grip on the gun remained steady. "That drunk's testimony won't hold up in any court." "Maybe not," Taylor agreed. "But combined with those documents Miss Morrison has been protecting, the ones that prove her father's legitimate claim to the mine, it's enough to hang all 3 of you." Marcus felt the gun barrel tremble slightly against his skin. Stone was realizing that killing witnesses wasn't going to solve his problem anymore. Not with the sheriff and 4 deputies watching every move. "Billy," Stone barked, "I said get those papers." But Billy was already backing away from the porch, his hands raised peacefully. "Sorry, Garrett, but I didn't sign up for a hanging offense. I'm done." The 3rd rider, a younger man who'd been silent until now, suddenly spurred his horse and bolted toward the tree lean, apparently deciding that retreat was the better part of valor. Stone found himself suddenly alone, outnumbered, and facing charges that would see him dancing at the end of a rope. His breathing became rapid and shallow, the kind of panic that made desperate men do dangerous things. "This isn't over," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Then louder, "Even if you take me in, the Crawford brothers will never stop hunting her. Those documents are worth too much." "Maybe," Sheriff Taylor said, slowly dismounting and taking a step closer. "But that's tomorrow's problem. Today's problem is you putting down that gun before someone gets hurt." Stone's hand began to shake visibly, and Marcus realized with growing horror that the man was about to make a choice that would get them all killed. Stone's desperation reached its breaking point. With a wild snarl, he shoved Marcus away and swung his gun toward Sheriff Taylor. But the sudden movement threw off his balance. Marcus stumbled, but managed to dive sideways off the porch as the first shot rang out. Taylor's deputies moved with practiced precision. 2 shots answered Stone's wild fire, and the outlaw crumpled to the ground, his weapon spinning uselessly in the dirt. The entire confrontation was over in seconds, leaving only the echo of gunfire and the smell of powder smoke hanging in the afternoon air. "Is everyone all right?" Taylor called out, keeping his weapon trained on Stone's motionless form. Marcus picked himself up from behind a wooden crate, checking for injuries and finding only bruised ribs. Elena rushed down from the porch, her face pale but determined. "I'm fine," she said, then looked down at Stone. "Is he dead?" One of the deputies confirmed after checking for a pulse. "Caught him square in the chest. Sheriff Taylor holstered his weapon and turned to Elena with an expression of genuine sympathy. "Miss Morrison, I'm sorry it took so long to get justice for your father. If you're willing to testify about those documents and what happened to your family, we can finally put the Crawford brothers where they belong." Elena nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "I've been waiting 3 years to tell someone who would listen." She glanced at Marcus. "The documents are in the house. Everything my father recorded about the mine, including proof that the Crawford brothers forged the papers claiming ownership." 2 hours later, after statements had been given and evidence collected, Sheriff Taylor and his men rode away with Stone's body and a promise to return within the week to escort Elena to the territorial courthouse. The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Marcus and Elena stood on the porch, watching the dust settle from the departed riders. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer filled with secrets and threats. "So," Marcus said finally, "I suppose you'll be leaving once this is all settled." Elena turned to look at him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Where would I go? I've been taking care of this place for 3 years. Seems like a waste to abandon it now." "It's my ranch now," he pointed out, though there was no challenge in his voice. "True," she agreed, "but you bought it for $1, and it came with someone to help run it." She gestured toward the rolling grassland beyond the house. "Besides, this place is big enough for 2 people who don't mind working hard." Marcus considered this, thinking about the lonely years he'd spent saving for his own land, dreaming of building something that would last. He'd imagined doing it alone, but standing here with Elena, watching the last light fade over their shared horizon, he realized some things were better built together. "Partners?" he asked, extending his hand. "Partners," she agreed, shaking it firmly. As the first stars appeared overhead, they walked back into the house together, ready to start building the life that a $1 ranch and a chance encounter had made possible. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these.